Hello YouTube, and welcome back to me trying to read every single lost episode creepypasta that I can get my hands on. Today, I'll be reading Access Powers Hetalia, episode 23.5. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this is one that I have been heavily anticipating. I have watched Hetalia, and I have heard about this creepypasta, and so I have been patiently waiting until I could finally reach it to read it. And I really hope it holds up to the hype, and I will try my best to not have it be too much of a biased sway. I know that a lot of my ratings for these are pretty low, especially near the beginning. We had a bunch of troll pastas. It was saturated with troll pastas, poorly written ones, or so well written but so obnoxious that I don't think I've ever really given a higher score to. So hopefully I can give due diligence to this creepypasta. But that being said, why don't we just get right into it? Access Powers Hetalia, episode 23.5. Hi everyone, Good Buddy Kyo here. I'm not really used to this. Sorry for the nervousness. I'm not really sure how to go about this. I mean, it's sort of out of the blue, but I want to at least put what happened out there for the other Hetalia fans like myself. I guess I'll just talk, type, or whatever, and just get this through. As much of an interesting experience this was, I'd rather not remember it and continue on with my derp life. Alright, so this happened a while ago, before school started, that it went down. But I should probably go back even further to when it really first started. It was when Access Powers Hetalia was in full swing. Second season was still bounding through the fandom and giving out new glorious episodes every Monday. My older sister and I were both very involved with the series, which was a rare occasion since she often didn't share interests with me. Oh sure, I could force myself into whatever she was getting into so we could at least have a reason to hang out, but this was the first she came into my fandom without me working for it. It was really nice. Considering it was still unknown in our small town, it was even nicer to just have someone to relate to. She and I cosplayed it together, watched episodes together, got merchandise together. You know, the whole kit caboodle. Though, she was always able to get more stuff than I was because she actually had a job. At some point, she actually bought a bootleg DVD of Hetalia so she could watch it anytime, a picture of which I provided here thanks to my mother lending me her camera for a second before she had it sold the next week. Of course, all of the episodes were being ripped from the internet sites that had them subbed. I watched 1 or 2 episodes with her, but really I was content with watching them online, so I left her to it. About 2 or 3 days after she got the DVD, she started acting really weird. It is the best way I can describe it. In a drop of a hat, she dropped the whole Hetalia series, setting aside her merchandise and shelving her Hetalia cosplays, even selling some of them. When I tried to ask her about what was up, she just said she didn't want to talk about it, to the point that she'd glare at me if I mentioned it to her. I was extremely disappointed at losing my sister when it came to sibling bonding in the fandom. At the time, just figuring she grew out of it or found something even better. That mindset especially fit in when she started to read Homestruck soon after it to have something to do. Now here's where it got even weirder. Now, it's been a while since then, probably like a month or so. I'm not sure why, probably a phone call from my best friend. I got the urge to watch some episodes with just some classic good old Italy. Though currently the internet was being worked on by my father since he was changing phone providers and all that mess, so I decided to look for the Hetalia DVD my sister had. It took me a long while, but I found it shoved in the back of the DVD cabinet. Not sure exactly why she shoved it back there. Well, at the time, the bootleg wasn't that bad, really. It had fan art of everyone as chibis around the whole world with the little title on top. Same for the disc, just printed on fan art. I popped the DVD in the player in my room and decided to look through the episodes to find a really fun one. Maybe the one when Romano was first introduced. As I went through the episode choice option though, I found something really weird in between episode 23 and 24. For those who don't know, it's the Liechtenstein and Switzerland episodes. Very cute indeed. And the 24th is the conclusion on the access powers on the island arc thing. But there was another square choice, like an episode, but there wasn't a title next to it, saying what number it was or what the episode was about. Though it wasn't that it was untitled that caught my interest, but the screenshot of it. It was Italy smiling, looking upwards in a content daze. His eyes actually opened, mind you, with glistening eyes and what looked like sand, like perhaps he was laying on it. This blew my friggin' mind, for this was something new. I craved for new things in a fandom, always. Perhaps this was a hidden chapter I wasn't aware of, like a bonus episode. I bit my lip and trembled with excitement, and I knew I had this all to myself. Wait until my friends heard about this. I was going to be more knowledgeable than anyone else. Of course, when I look back, I wish I wouldn't have found it. Without much further ado, I clicked the select button on my remote to watch it. The title animation appeared as always, the large orchestra blaring out for a few seconds to show the Japanese katakana of Hetalia with access powers next to it. Soon after, it shifted to the view of the island that the Axis were stranded on. Japan and Germany sitting against the shade of a tree while Italy just laid in the sand, soaking up the sun, that cute dumb look on his face. Now, before I go on, I've read stories like this before, about lost episodes of cartoons, stories that I didn't believe until now, honestly. And I know how they went off about it being extremely bad quality. But this actually wasn't too bad. Sure, it wasn't the best quality. It was still quite pixelated from being ripped off a site, then burned onto a disc. But it was okay. The sound was just a tad muffled, nothing too out of the ordinary. Of course, this kind of made it creepier later on, when it was able to be seen better. But I'll get to that in a bit. Back to the episode. While Italy was sunbathing in his jacket and shorts, the camera cut over to Germany and Japan, though they both looked a tad upset, if not a bit worried. And then they started to speak. Two things threw me off. One, there was no subtitles, so I had zero idea what they were talking about. And two, their voices were actually those who voiced them in the series. I was extremely impressed of such raw footage, though I was a bit miffed there were no subs. Oh well, as long as Hiroki Yasumoto, Japan's Seiyo, kept talking, I was happy all of the way. The two seemed to be chatting about something serious, Germany clutching his stomach from time to time in pain as Japan would nod and set a hand on his stomach as well. My guess was that they had run out of steady food on the item, so they were starving. That was kind of a downer to start an episode on, but it was only the beginning. There was probably a fun way to get food later on. Just then, Italy had called out, having the two of them look up to where he was, which was now currently running around in the ocean. He waved at them, and the two of them waved back unenthusiastically, before the other went back to before the other went back to just playing in the sun and water. I didn't notice this until then, but the only thing playing in the background of this was the ocean waves. Something not uncommon, but it certainly kept the atmosphere kind of stoic, especially when the focus was to the hungry and worried nations in the shade. But either way, I was too sucked up in just the beauty of new material, I didn't question it. I didn't even care that I didn't know the bulk of it. I mostly cared for the actions anyway. The nations were quiet for a while, before Japan had seemed to ask something, and Germany looked at him in shock, almost exclaiming before being quietly hushed by the island nation, making him whisper the line instead. Oh, what was Japan thinking? I thought. But Japan had repeated the Japanese statement in a more quieter and clearer tone, not taking his eyes off Italy in the water. For a few moments, the two of them discussed the issue, obviously talking about the Italian, though soon enough the two of them nodded in agreement. At that moment, even though it was just a few seconds, Germany had made the saddest face I had ever seen. Like he could just burst into tears at any moment, but kept it back. Honestly, I inwardly flipped my shirt at such an emotion, even if it was short, though it made me wonder even more what brought it on. The scene changed to nighttime. The three nations huddled around the fire for warmth, though they seemed to be at least content with their jackets on. As usual, Italy was fast asleep next to them, sleeping contently while leaving the other two nations to their thoughts. Still, only the sound of the oceans crashing against the shore was heard in the background, as the two were silent, though soon enough the camera panned over to them, giving each other a subtle nod. In unison, the two stood up, going over to Italy and picking him up very carefully, not wanting to wake him up. At this point, I was extremely confused. What were they planning to do with him? Were they going to a new location? Quietly, they shuffled the sleeping nation over to the ocean and carefully set him in face down. Japan setting his hands over the other's head so to keep it still below the water's surface. It didn't take long until Italy began to thrash around, bubbles popping furiously in the water next to his head, only having Japan press down harder while Germany was looking away with his eyes closed and lip being bitten into hard. While this was going on, my mouth was hanging ajar. Japan and Germany were drowning Italy? Why? As I just watched this insanity, I realized the words "Gomen nasai, Hetalia" coming from Japan. Sorry, Italy. What the hell? About 15 seconds later, which felt like almost forever of watching the poor nation, Italy's limbs fell with a plop in the water, the bubbles ceasing to rise anymore. The deed was done. But why? Japan and Germany picked up the waterlogged Italy and brought him back to the shore, placing him down next to the fire. While Germany sat aside, just staring at the fire as if contemplating what they just did, Japan unsheathed his sword and kneeled down next to the corpse, taking off his jacket and setting it aside. With one more look to the blonde before back down, Japan took a deep breath before making an incision at the base of his neck all the way down to his belly button, cutting in a bit more as he was able to flip the skin back to reveal the bloody organs of the once living nation. At this, I had to pause the episode, feeling quite lightheaded at this. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, I read and looked at gory Hetalia stuff, but seeing it down in Studio Dean's style and done in official voices, or if it's fake, a really good artist and very good sound-alikes, it was just way too surreal for me. And while I had the TV paused, I had a good chance to look at Italy's insides. God, That sounds so weird as I type this. And they just looked so real. Not that they were hypercamped, but as if the artist had stared at the inside anatomy of a person for hours, drawing every little curve to make it realistic. I wanted to stop watching. I wanted to just turn it off and abandon that TV with the DVD inside. But I was already too far in. I had to see this through to the end. It would haunt me for the rest of my life if I stopped here. After taking a short breather and drinking some water, I pressed play on my remote to resume the madness. Instantly, I was greeted with a slurp sound of Japan sliding his hand into Italy's body and pulling out one of the organs out of place. It looked like the liver. With it so detailed, it was hard not to mistake the organ. Japan sighed as he cut off the connecting strand with his sword and set the mess of an organ onto the other's discarded jacket before going back in and setting aside a kidney. Both of them. While Japan searched around, Germany reached over to some sharpened sticks he seemed to have gathered earlier and penetrated the sharp end through each organ that Japan had laid out. With a saddened sigh, he set the organ kebabs on a range on the fire so it could get cooked, which I didn't know how that was even possible. Once more, after a seemingly long period of time, Germany pulled the now cooked liver from the fire while handing Japan, who accepted it with his arms still blood-smeared, a kidney. Both of them were in silence before Japan muttered, "Itadakimasu," and both took a large bite from it. It still makes me feel weird when I think about seeing that scene. But that lightheadedness faded as I heard something that made me gasp. Deutsch? Nyan? Both of them turned in shock. The camera panned over to show that Italy was awake. What? How was he awake? They drowned him. Or was he just unconscious? Hell, I wasn't even sure what was going on, and it seemed like the other two had no idea either. Germany and Japan tried to explain themselves, but Italy began to grow more panicked, slowly getting what was happening, and he began to scream in pain, fear, sadness. I couldn't even pinpoint what emotion was there. But it was so weird to hear him like that. It almost sounded like the man voicing him was in a large amount of pain himself. Germany and Japan went over him, trying to get him to be quiet. Though after the large confusion of everyone yelling at once, Germany was the one to finally scream for everyone to be quiet, shaking Italy to try to make him quiet, resulting to just tugging the curl to make him stop him momentarily. At this point, when I should have laughed, I was practically at the point of tears. Germany talked, trying to appear strong and try to explain their situation. My guess of the situation was there was no food left, so they were going to eat Italy since he was the weakest. Though he was a nation, right? They were all nations. Why did they have to resort to that? Was that why Italy woke up? Soon enough, Italy gave an understanding nod, whimpering in pain and fear as well. He sputtered out something, paused at a point to cough, blood drooling down his chin. Now it was Japan's turn to talk, seeming to try to comfort him in a soothing tone. After his small speech, Italy nodded once more before looking down, seeing that Germany had gripped his hand tightly. With another nod from the German and Japanese nation, Japan went back over and scooped his hand into his now somewhat functioning body, pulling and cutting out his spleen and setting it aside. Italy almost screamed, reduced to a sort of mixture of whimpering and sobbing. The camera cut to a view of his and Germany's hand being even more constricted against each other. The shot panned up to a frowning Germany, who once glanced at Japan's work before speaking again, calling Italy's attention. He spoke for a bit, trying to smile, and soon Italy smiled back at him, for once in the series actually opening his eyes to reveal their golden honey color, and called him the familiar word he used to call him. Captain. Then there was a time skip, and soon a large portion of organs was laying on Italy's jacket. Things I could recognize being intestines, pancreas, bladder, practically everything but the brain, lungs, and heart. Japan wiped an arm to his forehead, smearing it with blood accidentally before impaling them on sticks sticking near the fire. He turned back to Germany, who was still holding Italy's hand. He crawled over to get a closer look, and Italy had seemed to pass on again, his eyes slightly glistening and staring blankly upwards with a small smile on his face. This shot was the very one showed in the menu. Japan looked up to Germany, seeing that he was frowning, blue eyes glistening with tears, as he still tried to get over having this happen to him. Japan set a hand on his shoulder, murmuring something seemingly comforting, making Germany nod in agreement and sigh shakily. Japan frowned lightly at this before he moved aside, grabbing the dead Italy's free hand and squeezing it lightly, saying something to Germany before looking to the fire where the organs were roasting. Germany glanced back at the fire for a moment before looking up at the sky where Italy was staring. The camera panned upwards to it, past the stars and everything, until it was completely black. And then the next episode started playing, just like that. No credits or anything. Just left the episode on a cryptic or optimistic note. I have no idea. I wish I could have it run on my computer to get screenshots, but the disc refuses to play on here for some reason, and I don't really have a good camera to snap a clear picture. My friend Fia was kind enough to get 2 screenshots for me, though the disc only worked on her computer for so long, but I'd rather not look at that again. It may not sound as bad when you read this, but it made me get away from Hetalia for a while, honestly. Though I'm not as weak-stomached as my sister. I still love the series, and I will continue to love it. But since then, I refuse to watch any anime episodes. I would prefer to see fan-made gore over official ones any time. And that is the end of the creepypasta. Okay, I can see why people feel that this one's a pretty good creepypasta. It's written well with care. There's a little awkwardness with some of the phrasing, but it's not riddled with cliches. I mean, it being bootleg, yes. At least it's not claiming to be the official, but it is from a bootleg disc. It being a sound-alike is pretty likely. I'm not sure what to say about the animation quality. I think it'd be a little hard for someone to mimic animation, but finding a sound-alike wouldn't be too difficult. While it is a shame there was no subtitles, so we could get a better read on the story, on what was going on in the creepypasta, being able to pick out a few lines that you're like, oh yeah, I most definitely remember this. I know that one from watching anime gives credence. I do appreciate that. But it not needing to be hyper-realistic, over-the-top gore, evil insanity ensues. The only thing being realistic being the organs, but them very much articulating that the realism still seemed like it was a drawn realism. It just seemed like someone really took the time to draw out the organs versus it's like a photo of the inside of someone. Is a pretty alright touch. The thing is that a lot of these creepypastas don't have the feeling that they could potentially be a real episode. And this one sort of feels like one. Now, from the episodes, snippets, when they are stranded on an island, Italy just magically finds food. I could see this as an alternative to if there wasn't magically food on the island, that it could potentially be a real episode. I could see it. And I do like this creepypasta. I'm gonna say it has the cliche of not being able to give us proof. So I'm going to say this is a 7 out of 10. Maybe bias, but I do like it. I think it's well written. I think it's plausible without having the negative toll of it just being BS, over exaggerated and whatnot. I do like it. So yeah, 7 out of 10. But let me know what you think. Aside from that, we are, as of right now, recording this out of the A section. This was the last creepypasta in the A section, and we can move on to B's. What a fast journey this has been. That being said, I do think it's a good time for me to say that it's bye-bye for now. Bye.